Before we go in on the ice, there's a few things that I did off camera that you guys should probably replicate. One is that, well, first I just rearranged this, so I brought the camera up and I brought an area light up. I noticed that one side of this geo was a bit too much in shadow, so I just created another area light. So if I look through this light here, we can see we're just kind of topping to an angle, and area light 2 is just kind of lower and hitting a side so that there's not quite as much shadow. Other than that, another thing that I did is in our ice, I added rest positions up here. So what we need to do is we need to create noise, but as I move down this timeline, we can see that the ice of this big bowl area starts to shatter and move up. If we don't have a rest position when we create our noise, then this is just going to swim through a noise pattern. So with our rest position, we can make sure that we lock down our noise pattern, so even if this moves, it's going to maintain the same values on its surface. So what I did here is the only thing that needs to have a time shift is the ice shatter, the piece that's moving. And so we're just locking it on frame 1100 because that's the frame that we switch from our original ice to the shattered ice. And since this doesn't move at all, we can put a rest position, but it doesn't need to be time locked, and neither does this bowl here since this grows over time. So we can't lock anything because the point count changes, but we still need this rest position there. Another thing that I did is I changed the noise pattern. I just made the noise larger. So if we look at this, I just made the frequency 5, amplitude of 2.8. It just looked a bit chunky before. So larger noise pattern will just give us a softer amount of inner volume. All right, so now we're going to create some noise patterns. So to do that, we need a point VOP. And then here, we're going to make a bind. So we need to call our rest attribute instead of using our position. So we're going to make rest, make it a vector, and then we're going to make some turbulent noise. If I move that there, put that in the CD. Let me just make sure we're viewing it. Let's go back to where it's actually grown, but not moving. Let's do something like 1101, just make sure we've switched to the part where it starts to shatter and break. Okay, so first off, I'm gonna go back in here. And then I'm just gonna take a fit, and we're just gonna use this default noise right here. And then I'm gonna say with this fit, if I move this range, I can make the darks more dark or the lights more light. So I'm gonna say something like 0.07 for the darks, and the max I'm gonna make 0.18. So that makes the lights light. And so this looks cool, but we're gonna have to do some more to this. First, I want to put noise within this noise. And this is something I do a lot to make noise just look a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to do another turbulent noise. I'm going to make it simplex. Still going to use the rest position. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing 3D noise instead of 2D. I'm going to say frequency of, let's say 4.8 is what I had done before, and I think that looked good. So just keep it at that. And then we're going to feed this into the frequency. So then that changes it up significantly. We get a lot of interesting banding, a lot of stuff that I would imagine would be on ice if it was flash frozen. It might not be exactly photoreal, but since we're dealing with sort of magical elements, I think we have a little bit of creative license for this ice. So that looks interesting. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this, I'm going to make a bind export. And I'm going to plug this into here because we're going to use this for our basically a transparency map. And we're going to name this diffuse ramp. So another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create another turbulent noise. I'm going to feed this up into our rest again. This turbulent noise, we're going to just keep it as alligator noise. And we're going to increase the frequency significantly, so we're going to make this 30. 31's fine. We're going to make an amplitude of 5. And we're going to multiply into this value that we have here. And it's going to look pretty crazy. We need to break this surface up a bit. And then we're going to create a ramp. So I'm going to multiply into this. I'm going to do a constant, a multiply constant. I'm just going to mult these values down. Actually, I'm going to mult them up. So that's looking interesting. Let's just see without it. And well, let's see what happens with offset too. I mean, that's interesting. I'm going to keep it at that. So that all looks cool. We have our ramp, and then I'm going to do a clamp at the end, just to make sure that none of our values go negative or below 0 or above 1. And so now what we can do is we can pop up, and right here we have this color ramp. And now we can start inputting colors to make this, instead of black and white, we're going to make it sort of an icy blue. So first I'm going to set our lowest value. Something like that. And then I'm going to make it darker. Something like that, I think looks good. And then we want a gradient. We're going to start playing with this a little bit. I don't want this to be pure white. So I'm going to alter the blue and move this up a bit. So now it's not pure white. So that's all looking interesting. So yeah, we're going to keep this around this color. And then another thing that we're going to do, so we have our diffuse ramp that is using just the float value of this color. But what I want to do is I want to start adding something to work towards displacement. So to do that, we are going to create another point VOP. Gonna dive in there, and there's a few things we're gonna do here. First, I'm going to create luminance. And we're gonna use this color. So this is just gonna give us a float value of the brightest to darkest colors that we have. And of course, I'm not viewing it. So that looks cool, but we need blacks and whites. So I'm going to do a fit. So I'm going to do something like move this value up to maybe 0.2 or something. Something like that. Let's do 175. Yeah, so now we have our bright brights and our dark darks. So next I'm going to bring in our rest again. Whoop. Keep typing rest, I just want to type bind. We'll do a rest. Make sure it's a vector. And I'm going to create a turbulent noise. And we're going to get a little crazy with this turbulent noise. First, I'm going to drop a multiply. We're going to take this value that we made. We're going to multiply this into this. We're going to view that just to see what we're doing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this simplex noise. And then I'm going to up the frequency to a crazy level here. So we're going to do 151. Amplitude's fine. I'm going to bring down the attenuation, which I almost never really mess with. But if we make it at something like this, then it's not going to drastically change our channels. So yeah, 4.62 should be fine. So what this is going to do is this is going to be fed into a displacement map, and so this is going to make the spots where it's sort of frosted over and not see-through, it's going to make it bumpy and just a little bit more interesting to the surface and not perfectly smooth. We still don't want this black area to be perfectly smooth though, and so I found a good way to get some good shapes out of that. So first I'm going to create a clamp. Make sure that these values are 0 to 1. I'm going to put that in here. So that's looking fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a ceiling. So it's going to take anything that has a value greater than 1 or greater than point whatever and just move it to 1. So this gives us perfect black and white. We just want the blacks, so I'm going to do complement, and this is going to invert it, so now I have white where the black is. And so next we're going to create some more noise. So I'm going to create a turbulent noise. Again, we want to use our rest position. And then this, I'm going to create a fit. And we're going to multiply into this value so we can sort of cut into our white area. So right now it doesn't look all that interesting. One thing I guess I could do is I could say we can make this amplitude 0.15. I'll lower the rough or increase the roughness to 6.5. Again, still not going to change a whole lot. And our fit, we're going to take our source minimum and make it 0.095. Still not that interesting, but that's okay because we've got one more trick up our sleeve. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a curl noise 2D. And then if I plug this also into our rest, any noise needs a rest position so it doesn't swim. So we're going to feed this into the frequency. And now we have some interesting shapes. So this is going to be the weird sort of swirly banding that we're going to get in this ice, like I would expect ice to have. So this is just going to break the shape up so it's less simple. It's going to make the surface look a lot cooler. And so that's what we have this fit here for. So I can sharpen it. I liked it where it was though. So we're going to keep it at 0.095. And then all we need to do now is we have the value over here. and then the value here. And we're just going to go and add them together. And then just gonna make a clamp to make sure that none of them go above 1. And then if we look at this, we have our varied noise. I think that looks pretty cool. We don't need this to be CD anymore. This was just to look at it. So now we're just gonna do a bind, export, connect this, and we'll call this displace. And this can remain afloat. And so now we have our color and we have our displacement map. So next we need to move over and create a shader. So let's go to the matte net. We're going to make a shader now, and it's going to be a principled shader. I don't like the principled shader, but in this one instance I actually got some pretty good results, so I'm going to use it, but usually I use a classic shader for my shading needs. So we're going to first define base color, and I'm going to make a bind. Just make sure that it's pulling in CD, which is a vector. So there's some things that we're going to do here. First, the index of refraction, IOR, for ice is 1.309, which isn't super important, but might as well be somewhat realistic here. Then for reflection, I'm going to make reflectivity only like 0.75. And we're going to want to see what we're doing here, so let's go to out. And for candidate or force objects, we're just going to use set geo and ice for now. And then we'll work our way up. So I'm going to go to render view and render test. Oh, I also want to make sure that ice has ice. I had some test a test shader in there before. Now I'm putting the one that we're building now. So there shouldn't be much going on right now with this. All right, so this doesn't look like ice, but we at least have the color going. So that is the first step. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to go back to the shader, and we're going to bring in our diffuse ramp. So we're going to make a bind. Just going to move this stuff over a bit. Going to make a bind. Oh, sorry, we have the bind, so this is going to be called diffuse ramp. And we can see that we have that on our geo right now in our geometry spreadsheet. And so diffuse ramp is going to go into transparency. And so I'm pretty sure that transparency works a little bit different in that you're telling it how transparent it is instead of where it's diffuse versus where it's not diffuse. So if we just render this, I suspect that it's going to be the opposite of what we want. So all this dark stuff is going to be diffuse, and all this light stuff we're going to be able to see through. But let's just take a look. So as I suspected, yes, we can see just through this blackness that it is indeed transparent where the white is. And so we want the opposite of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a complement. And I think that should be good. Let's see what happens now. Okay. So this is starting to go, and we can see a lot of darkness down here. But we can see that where we want diffuse color, there is diffuse color. And so it looks cool, but we need to be able to see through this. And so there's a couple more steps that we need to take in order to make sure that this is as transparent and as interesting as it could be. The first thing I'm going to do is I want there to be a transmission color. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to make this sort of a pale blue. And so when light passes through this, it's going to make everything sort of a blue ice, which I think just is kind of interesting. Then another thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to opacity, and where it says fake caustics, I'm going to turn that on. And so now this is treating this more like glass or ice. And so light is passing through this and allowing rays to hit the bottom, and therefore light doesn't just go in there and die. So I'm going to let this go just for a little bit. So I'm going to stop it here. We're not going to let it. It's going to take a little bit because this is computing refraction, which in Mantra takes a decent amount of time. But we can already see right here that we got our bubbles inside. And there is some refraction going on. We have light peeking through here. We do have some diffuse. The next thing that we want to do is where we have all this sort of diffuse frosty stuff, we're going to want to bump that up a bit, add some displacement, and we want some wavy displacement on this, and we already made our map. So what we can do now is we can go to displacement, and then we're going to do custom input. And for our displacement bound, I'm going to do 0.01. Actually, I'm going to do 0.001. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring in our bind. We're going to say displace. And then down here in other, this is where it's expecting your custom displacement map. So I can just go boop and do that. So yeah, displacement, custom input, displacement bound. All right, so I'm gonna kick this one off after I save it, because again, rendering, this is where I crash the most. Another thing that we can see here is that with this fake caustics, it is spilling light onto this bowl, which is a nice thing. All right, so I am going to hit render and we'll check back. I'm not going to let it go all the way because it's going to take a while, but we'll get a good idea if the displacement is working as we expected. Okay, it is not working as expected. So one of the things that I forgot to do is we have the map, but we don't have a good range for this to actually be displacing the surface. So it is displacing it so insanely much that it's exploding. What we need to do is we need to add a multiply constant. And we're going to mult it way, way down. So instead of 1, we're going to do 0.0065. So now I'm going to hit render and we'll take a look at that. Okay, so this is how much it's done for about 5 minutes, and I think that it's breaking up the surface. I can just already tell from this render that the surface is now less pristine. So I think we're going to stick with these settings. If anything, I might change the multiplier. We'll try 0.007, but I don't think we need to go much higher than that. And the next thing that we need to do, now that we have our shader in a good spot, I think this should work. So what we need to do now is we need to go to Ice Cloud. And so I had created before just in a test, and we're going to put that in here. We're going to make a basic smoke from our material palette, which is down in volume. Now this Ice Cloud has basic smoke. In basic smoke, we need to change its density to something like, we'll just do 2.5. Actually, we'll do 3. Why not? Just to make sure that it's there. Another thing that I believe I had forgotten to do, maybe I haven't, let's see. Okay, good. So just make sure that in your ice cloud, you are importing ice cloud. I think when I was setting it up before, I had missed this and then went and fixed it. So just make sure out ice cloud is here. Make sure that it has basic smoke. Then we're gonna go into our out and we're gonna set ice cloud here. So now when we render, the volume should show up inside here. So I'm just gonna take a snapshot and I'm gonna hit render and we'll check back in a couple minutes. All right, the render's done. So this is about 70% done. And if we go from here to here, we can see that, yep, I can see the bits of cloudy volume inside and it looks exactly how I would expect it to look. So I think we're good. I think the ice is looking interesting.